Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest Skewedcast. We're trying it over Zoom today versus Skype. So that's why you'll see the video up in the corner here with multiple pictures instead of just a couple of us. And I'm joined, as always, with Justin and Michael. But we have a special guest today who's going to tell us about entertainment options during the coronavirus era. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and start off, please?
Well, my name is Shari Spiro, and I am the founder and CEO of AdMagic and Breaking Games.
Very good. Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys do and how the current situation has changed your day-to-day operations?
Well, we've been very lucky in that the current situation has not changed our day-to-day operations as much as it's changed other people's lives. A lot of my team, most of the office workers are working remotely. One or two people go into the buildings, but that's it. Almost everyone else is working remotely. So it's forced me to become very organized, and I've been doing gigantic Zoom meetings for the first time in my life. And I like the medium, so it's been working out pretty well. And fortunately, our warehouses are still open. Of course, everybody's social distancing. So, we're still able to ship games, and we're still manufacturing in China. But one thing we've done is we've started manufacturing more in the U.S. during this crisis.
Okay. And Michael, I know you had a question about the rise of board games recently. So do you want to go ahead and ask that?
Yeah, hey, Shari. One of the questions, or one of the things that I've kind of seen recently is there's been a pretty big rise in board games with all the entertainment options we saw available, a lot of video games, that sort of thing. We still see a lot of folks who are really interested in getting around a table and still having that personal contact playing board games. So how has that kind of changed, and what's been your experience with that over the past several years as that's kind of come back and kind of grown into the enterprise that it is now?
You know, I entered the industry just at the right time, I think, because when I started printing Cards Against Humanity, that was, I want to say it was like 2011 or 2012. And things just kind of spiraled from there in not only the party game aspect of it, but also strategic games, which is what Breaking Games is starting to specialize in. And I've seen a real rise in the appreciation of just being with other people because, a lot of this generation grew up on electronic devices. And so the opportunity to, get with friends and actually experience a game has really driven the industry. I also think Kickstarter did a lot to drive the industry because prior to this, you had to collect an insurance claim or something in order to be able to afford to print a board game because they cost thousands of dollars to print. So I think Kickstarter and the board game community, Board Game Geek, Dice Tower, all of these places have helped to really spur on the growth of the industry. And so I think that's why we see such an upsurge, and there's so much communication about board games. Back in the day, you'd play a game and maybe you could tell a few friends, hey, I like this game. Now you get on Facebook, you share the pictures and the fun, and all of a sudden, there are thousands of followers for that game. So we owe a lot of it to Kickstarter, but we also owe a lot of it to the online board game community that's sprung up.
That is really interesting because it seems like there's just such a, I guess, diverse population of gamers right now. One of the things that I noticed was years ago at shows like PAX West, you saw a larger and larger contingent of vendors, dealers, and exhibitionists at what many people always said, well, this is a traditional video game convention. You started to see more and more board gaming. You started to see tournaments, and then it became so popular that they basically said, you know what, we're making our own, and they called it PAX Unplugged, which was a straight up no video games, board and card games only because the popularity had grown so big.
Yeah, PAX Unplugged was great for us this year. We were able to go, thank goodness. And, it's really geared towards just board games, which is perfect for us. So we were able to check out, try out some new board games, play test some of our newer things, play test some things that were still in development. And I think the community likes that. I think that's a big part of what I like is being able to play test things with, at the shows and see what the responses are.
And Justin, did you have a question really quick before I go on to the next one?
Yeah, so how is AdMagic pivoting right now just in relation to everything that's going on, also to include puzzles? I've seen that quite a bit, that it's one of the top activities right now during quarantine.
Well, we have two printing facilities in the United States. I don't know if you know this, but we have AdMagic Print and Play, which is run by Andrew Tulson. Andrew's been doing this for many, many years, and we acquired Print and Play about 4 years ago. So he does mostly prototypes and short runs for game designers. And then we also acquired Your Playing Cards, which is in New Hampshire. And Dave, who's been printing in New Hampshire for many, many years for me, came up with this idea of doing playing card puzzles. So what we started manufacturing is playing card puzzles, and a Hollywood agent actually got in touch with me and said he had an idea where he could get influencers to donate pictures and Instagram post images. And what we've come up with is a thing called Puzzles for the Pandemic, where the influencers donate the profits from the puzzles to first responder charities. So puzzlesforthepandemic.com just launched. And I can't tell you who our first influencer is going to be, but it looks like we're going to have a pretty good one. So we're very excited about that. And then, of course, we're just printing custom puzzles for just anyone, who wants them, either jigsaw puzzles, because Andrew can do jigsaw puzzles out there, or playing card puzzles. And the playing card puzzles are actually a lot of fun. So it's a new area for us, but we're super excited about it. And we're glad that we could pivot so quickly, especially because people need things to keep them occupied right now.
Does it get to be an issue with licensing at all in terms of what the subject matter for the games or the puzzles are, or do you tend to basically just create your own content exclusively?
Well, for the Puzzles for the Pandemic, those will be licensed from the influencers. We have a photo release that they'll be signing. And but for the other puzzles, what I was thinking of doing was reaching out and asking people to contribute art ideas for the puzzles, because we actually need some. And then we would license them just like we license game ideas. So we would pay a royalty on puzzle sales. So I think that's somewhere we're heading in the future.
And you know what I find so interesting about this is there's all this belief that most gamers have very short attention spans. And we know somebody at the radio station, actually the host of the show, and he regularly goes to these conventions, and he says, oh, some of these games, they'll run hours. And he said, it's not like a massive gaming session for Call of Duty or something like that. He said there are some games I've heard stories of they can run days where they have to take a break, and it reminded me back in the day of if you had a couple of really good Dungeons and Dragons players who could make a whole campaign last a week or more, and they'd be forced to take breaks. And I think it's interesting, and it just shows if the quality is good, if there's a lot of diversity to it, people will continue to find new ways to do it, especially now. They need a break from everything that's going on. And truthfully, I mean, I can tell you fortunately, the gaming industry, they're still cranking out their games, the releases as planned, but you're getting through them faster and faster now with all this free time. And it's like, okay, what next?
Yeah,
20 hours, 20 hours of gaming sounds great, but when you finish it in 3 days, it's like, oh, okay, now what?
I need more. I need more.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So we've got games that are 15 minutes long, and then Dwellings of Eldervale, which is like 2 hours long. That's a solid 2-hour game. I mean, it could be longer. It depends on how long it takes to learn, because it takes people a while to learn it. But that's a epic type of adventure, once you start playing that game. But then we have other games that, take 15 minutes, like You're Doomed. So I think it's a matter of taste, but I do think that gamers have a tremendous attention span. I think that of all people, gamers have the best attention spans because they have to suck down the rules. They have to follow what's going on. I mean, and the more complicated the game, the more your attention span has to be, right there. And I think the rise of strategic games is a good sign, because it means that people do have longer attention spans. I mean, we certainly want to think that we're getting smarter. I certainly don't want to think that people are getting dumber and have lower attention spans. And I certainly don't see that with the people that I play games with or our gaming community in general.
Now, before I go to my next question, I wanted to check, Justin or Michael, did you have any other things that you wanted to ask right now? Because definitely this is such a rich topic, and there's countless numbers of questions we can ask for this.
Yeah, I've got one actually. With everybody kind of isolating now, the social isolation and everything else, we've seen people get creative with things like, obviously computer games, it makes it easy to play remote with people. We've seen people use Skype and use Discord and that kind of thing to play Dungeons and Dragons. Have you seen any interesting, or have you heard of any interesting ways that maybe board game people, the people that get together on a regular basis that play board games, are kind of coming together virtually to play some games?
Well, we are looking at putting our games on some of the online platforms, for sure. We've met with 2 of them so far, and we are planning on putting our games up for online play, because I think that's a good interim fix. In the end, this is going to be over, and we're going to be able to play board games in person again. But right now, some of the online platforms are going to be useful. And they're already very busy with other publishers trying to get their games online. So I think that's a good fix. We also have some games you could play over things like Zoom, but most of those games are pretty simple, and by the nature of them, they have to be. I know that Peter Vaughan played Rise of Tribes over Zoom the other day, and was doing all the moves. So you can do that. You can have one person have the game and do all the moves and do all the rolls, hey, it's your turn, I'm going to roll for you, that type of thing. So it can be done. You can be creative, and it can be done. And I think certainly that's a good alternative, so you can still have the social interaction. But I think these online platforms are really going to kind of ramp up over the next couple of weeks.
And Justin, did you have anything to ask right now?
No, I just wanted to say, thanks for doing what you're doing, because obviously this is going to be needed for what's going on right now.
Well, my goal is to stay in business. I have quite a large group of people amassed after all of these years. So I've been in business for almost 30 years, and of course I pivoted into games in about 2011, and it's been the happiest, however many, 9 years of my life, because I absolutely love it, and I really have no desire to see this impact my business in any way.
So I'll try not to put you on too big of a spot here. So obviously you don't need to mention specific events or so on, but I am curious, with everything being up in the air, and also since obviously there's a lot of planning involved for these, have you had any discussions with, or have various conventions spoken to you about, hey, we're rescheduling, or this is the rescheduled date, or we're hoping to do it on this date still? Can you do that? Because, I mean, just from my standpoint of going to cover or speak at them, it's chaotic when you have things go, well, we're not happening in May, we're going in September, or we're still hoping to be able to do it end of July, or we've got 3 in 3 weeks in August. And for you, it has to be even worse, because you have all the, get stuff on hand, swag, ship, how is that going for you?
I'm planning on pulling out of all conventions for the remainder of the year, period. I don't want to put my people on the road. I don't see this being a magical fix in the next 6 months. Being really honest with you, I think it's going to spiral for 18 months or so in the United States. I don't see how it could be any less myself. I'm sure there's areas that are going to be fine. My area is not one of them. I'm in New Jersey. Well, I'm in Pennsylvania right now, but yeah, I think it's going to be a while before we get back into the convention schedule like we used to. I mean, we were doing 8 conventions a year, so definitely I don't have any plans for the next 6 months. I'm in negotiation with Gen Con and some of the other ones to put off the plans until next year. Mm-hmm. They have not officially canceled yet.
And when were they supposed to? It's over late summer, isn't it?
Yeah, like July 30th, I think, is when they were scheduled to start.
Yeah. What I found interesting was so many shows that decided to postpone versus cancel. They all jumped on September, and I know a lot of that had to do with, like the show locally said, well, this was the date that we could get dates. I mean, they had to go from 4 days to 3 days, but it's interesting how, like you see shows who WonderCon, for example, it was supposed to happen next weekend, who basically said, we're postponing to a date unknown, but yet their parent company, Comic-Con, has said, we're still hoping end of July, but obviously we're going to keep an eye on things. And it reminded me of how things were right before this all hit, when you had things like Level Up Expo happened, you had PAX East, C2E2, and I forget what the other show was that happened, but they were all getting hit with companies saying, like Sony, we're out. And,
Right.
you know, some of the smaller ones came saying, we can't afford to pass up this opportunity. And yet, like they said, your situation is a prime example. There's a lot of question as to, okay, let's say, and I'll just use them for an example because they have not officially said they're off, but let's say San Diego Comic-Con decides to go for it in July, and they're given okay, well, it's probably okay to do this. There's a lot of question as to how many guests are going to show up, how many ticket holders are still going to go. It'll be interesting to see if people take a very cautious approach, or if people are going to just say, thank God we've got an event, and come rolling back. And, you know, there's really no precedent for this in any modern era.
You know, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I think that we have to be smart about this. And my gut feeling says, just don't do anything for the rest of the year, and then see how next year goes. So, I mean, what we're doing instead of going to cons is we're investing in online advertising. We're looking for clever online platforms. We're partnering more with our, you know, the sites that we've been involved with, like Dice Tower and Board Game Geek, and just, you know, just doing more online, reaching out to our online communities, you know, and that's really, I think, our best move right now, you know?
And that is true, because as you said, you have to be so careful. I mean, prime example is if you look at China, they started opening movie theaters. They had, I think, 500 movie theaters opened, and they were saying in some areas people would not even buy tickets. Nobody would come out. They started to feel confident enough to open another 200, but under like really strict guidelines. I was reading, like, you had to show your health certificate. They would check your temperature at the door. You had to wear a mask. The auditorium was sanitized between shows, and people had to sit apart. And they were still having problems getting people to come out. And then lo and behold, just as they were about to roll out the other 200, they had to shut it all down because apparently a group of expats made it home, and lo and behold, they had it. And so they had to start the whole process all over again.
Better safe than sorry is what
Exactly.
I say right now. So we're gonna concentrate our efforts on, you know, online advertising, but our development work is still going on. It's a little hard for the development department because they want to play test. And it's really hard to play test, you know, with people when there are no people to play test with. So we're looking for large families, you know, things like that, people who are living together and, you know, all under one roof, so we can get them to play test. Yeah, that's the challenge when you're developing a new game, is to make sure that the play testing can still go on.
So expanding on that, when you had mentioned the situation that you're having to adapt to, we're all having to adapt to, but from concept to development to ready to go to the public, what is the normal time frame for that, and how has that changed under the current situation?
You know, it's interesting. Every game is different. So it's not like a movie where you can say, okay, a movie's going to take 2 to 3 years. With a game, some games go to market in a couple of months. I mean, they're ready to go. They come to us, like We're Doomed happened like that. You know, it came to us, it was pretty much ready to go. The art was good. The gameplay didn't need to be tweaked. It was great. And so it went right to market and was done so quickly. Dwellings of Eldervale, on the other hand, Luke Laurie started 5 years ago. You know, we got involved with it 2 years ago, and it's in manufacturing now, but, you know, it took a couple of years. Rise of Tribes took a couple of years. So I would say on average, 2 years is a good amount of time to develop a game. But some games go quicker, you know, but what's happening now is we have one under development, Meeple Mountain, which is great. I think we got through most of the play testing, thank goodness, or that would have been delayed. So right now we're looking pretty good. But you know, new ones that we're looking at doing are going to take a lot longer because we can't really play test them. Not the way we're used to play testing them. So
Sure.
that there is going to be a delay, and I do expect a lag. So pivoting into puzzles and maybe quicker, easier to develop games that require less play testing for the time being may be a thing. But we do have like a slate of 37 games that we're working on. So it's a lot over the next couple of years.
And you'd mentioned your shipping and such. I read, I mean, obviously, you know, some of these, there are often political agendas behind them. But I read somewhere that there was a couple of politicians who came out and said, if we don't get some help for them soon, the post office could be defunct by June. Now, obviously, there are other shipping companies, but if this situation continues to spiral, have you already had to look at contingency plans for shipping and stuff like that, or?
Well, we haven't had any problems with shipping. I mean, we
Good.
don't really use the post office that much, although, I mean, the warehouse probably does for certain size games. I don't know why the post office would be in trouble per se. I'm not really sure. I haven't read anything like that. We haven't had much difficulty, knock on wood, with shipping so far, except for some air freight won't fly into Newark Airport right at the moment, understandably, because there are a large amount of cases in the New York area. But other than that, we really haven't seen a lot of problems with shipping so far. I mean, interstate commerce is still happening. My warehouses are open. Truckers are coming in every day. We're delivering to Target and Walmart and Barnes and Noble. So, you know, business is still going, thank goodness. I feel very fortunate.
Yeah.
Very fortunate.
And Michael, did you have something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to pivot back just to kind of give us a little bit happier topic too. Is, you know, how did you get into the board gaming scene? You said you kind of got into that back in 2011. How did you get into that for people who are kind of looking to figure out how to break into that market, in particular?
I really got lucky. I mean, I was printing custom playing cards. I had been doing promotional items for years, like all kinds of weird. I manufacture a lot of weird things. I still manufacture a lot of weird things. I like making things. I think it's interesting to try to figure out how to manufacture them. But when I was placing #1 under custom playing cards, and I got a call from Cards Against Humanity. I don't know who's got that noise in the background, but you could mute. Just so you know. Is that you? Yeah, you can mute.
No, I don't think so. I'll check.
Yeah, you can just you can point to your thing. Yeah, you did it. So basically, that's how I got in. So my way of getting in was really through, I was placing really high in Google searches under custom playing cards. And so game designers were Googling those words, and that's how I got into the space. Once I was into the space, I was making Cards Against Humanity, obviously, and then I got excited about publishing in general. And I think the first game I published was Poop. And then once I got involved with my dev team, I started getting into more strategic games. And so I think really the key to it is if you've got a good sense of what's fun, you could become a game publisher. And so my way of telling what's fun is simply to watch people playing the game. If people are playing a game and they're having a good time, and they're having a really good time, it's kind of obvious to me that the game is going to be a hit. And I like to do grassroots testing, which is why it's such a bummer that we can't go to trade shows right now, because that's where I like to see a lot of gameplay or any kind of, unplugged or, unpub. I used to go to, things like that, any of the spiels, and we went to all of that stuff just to find new game designers and watch the gameplay in prototype form. And so that's how I really started branching out into new games. I went to Origins and somebody presented me with Expansity, and I was up till 1:30 in the morning playing it. I knew it was a fun game, so we signed it. So I think a lot of it is you have to go with your gut, and you can tell if a game is a lot of fun. But you also have to have the capital to put up to manufacture the games. And you also have to have a very, very secure pipeline or supply chain. So, I've been in printing for a long, long time, so I had a good supply chain already set up.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate it because I know these are very difficult situations all around, but hopefully better days ahead for everybody, and that we will continue to look forward to seeing the new products and games that you put out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the
Anytime.
distraction. Okay. Take care.
Thank you. Now. Bye-bye. Okay, guys, so we have a lot of new stuff coming for the show this afternoon. We have some guests coming from Phoenix Fan Fusion who will be with us this afternoon. We also have some entertainment news to discuss. And so, Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in console news today, because we understand that there's been a little more news coming out of the Microsoft camp in regard to the new system.
Well, I haven't seen anything recent outside of what we already knew as far as the specs are concerned. I mean, obviously, one of the things that we've been kind of curious about, and I think we're still curious about, is that, you know, Microsoft has kind of shown all their cards right now, that we know what the console looks like. We've seen a breakdown. We've seen it in the hands of others. We know what the controller is like. We know that controller is still going to be using batteries, which I personally prefer. You know, some people are complaining that the fact that you don't want to have to buy charge kits for it, that sort of thing. But all in all, I like the idea that you have the option of if you lose charge on your batteries, then you can just throw in a pair of AA's and continue on from there. One of the things that's really interesting, though, is with Microsoft kind of doubling down and showing, for lack of a better word, their hand. It's funny that we're not seeing the same kind of thing from Sony. I mean, there's lots of rumors going around, which I don't know how substantiated they are, with some concerns with the Sony platform overheating, concerns with the Sony platform not being able to keep consistent frame rates. I've also heard rumors that there's a potential complete redesign of the Sony platform in general that could be pushing the console back another year from a release date. So there are lots of, again, these are rumors. They come from reliable sources, but I wouldn't say that, you know, we're not going to see something from Sony. I think there was a big concern, I think, when they kind of said that they were going to announce the PlayStation 5 and we were going to see, get to see some, you know, behind, you know, actual console things. And what we see is Sony brought their, just pretty much brought their GDC conference about talking about SSD drives and memory. So it's really interesting space that we're in, you know, because again, Sony's been very quiet this generation, which is, you know, not terribly unusual for them. However, one of the things that has been unusual is that Microsoft is showing pretty much everything, and we're not seeing the same kind of response from Sony. So yeah, it's going to be very curious next couple of months to see where we're at.
What I find interesting is it seems to me that Microsoft is talking a lot more smack than they normally do. And I've heard stuff about how they made a comment about Sony's last showcase and how, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it gave them even more confidence going forward and how they are they think they're poised to win this generation. And, you know, by the same time, people always look at it this way. They go, okay, sure, you're going to sell in the US, but you're not going to sell overseas. It never does. And Sony still has all of the exclusives. So I kind of look at it like this. I don't know if Sony could be in a position to let a new console from their chief rival launch significantly before. I mean, we're not talking a month or two. If it's several months to a year, that could be an absolute disaster. But we've already talked about the possibility of problems getting a hold of components. We've heard forget the components, so the manufacturing, shipping, distribution, marketing, all of this is going to be a real, potential to cause problems down the road. So it will be interesting. I mean, like, for example, I don't know if you guys heard, but Bethesda not only called off QuakeCon this week, they announced that they are not going to be doing a streaming showcase in June. A lot of people admit, we've talked about it. We're looking at E3 helping companies and how they would probably possibly do a lot of digital showcases to give companies a platform to still make their major announcements, to give the gaming public something. And they basically said, nah, in the current situation, we're not going to be able to put it on. We'll wait and do things later. So, Justin, you've been a bit quiet. Why don't you let us? What is your take on all that?
Yeah, I think, like you were saying, it's kind of because we're in such a unique situation, every company is going to be kind of treating it differently. I think we'll still see announcements. We'll still see E3 big announcements throughout, but they're just going to be scattered throughout the year now instead of, all at once. So, we might not get something from Bethesda in June, and we might not get QuakeCon, of course. But they might announce a digital event, some other month like July or August, or even before that. It's hard to say, but I do think we'll very likely see a lot of situations like that where we'll get Nintendo Direct type events or announcements from companies. That seems to be where everybody's kind of heading now, and it just sort of makes sense.
Okay, well, our next guest is here, and we're going to be talking about Phoenix Fan Fusion and so on and so forth. Hello, Kristin. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am great. How are you?
We're holding in there as best we can. And before we go into the introduction, I'll let you know we, in addition to the numerous questions we have, I did get a few from some of the Blue Ribbon Army group and so on. A lot of people have a lot of questions, so we look forward to hearing what you have. But if you don't mind, please go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Absolutely. My name is Kristin Rowan. I am the Director of Marketing, Public Relations, and Sales for Square Egg Entertainment and Phoenix Fan Fusion.
Very good. So obviously, for those who don't know, the show was originally planned for end of May, and it's been pushed to end of September, if I remember correctly.
That's correct. September 25th to the 27th.
Okay. So the first question I have, and like I said, I'll try not to put you on the spot, but this was the very first thing that I came up with, and a lot of people said, make sure you ask this one. I know that when these guest contracts are negotiated, they often have an escape clause in them in case filming or jobs contradict with their convention appearances. So what we've been wondering is, when things are to a point where people can start doing conventions again, they can start filming, how many of the current guests do you expect to be available? And do you have a concern that all of a sudden... I'm
not sure if you can hear me, but I've lost audio completely, so I missed that entire question.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so basically my question was, when conventions...
Yeah, I can see that you're talking, but I can't hear anything.
Okay, let's see.
Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can fix that.
All right.
I don't know if it's my end or yours.
Okay. Choice of live radio, huh?
It was me. I've got you back. You want to...
Okay. Absolutely, I can, Kristin. So I'm going to try not to put you on the spot here with this, but this was the first question I had, and this is one that a few people in the groups asked me to ask. So when conventions are able to resume, we'll probably also see an influx of filming resuming for television, movies and stuff like that. As such, there might be even greater demands and shorter windows on the guests. So what we've been curious about is, number one, how many of the currently booked guests do you expect to be available in September? And do you have like a plan in place should all of a sudden it be very difficult to get guests either through filming, schedule conflicts with other conventions, or fact, some agents may just say, I'm not comfortable yet putting them out there in front of large crowds?
Sure, I will answer as well as I can. First, as soon as we found out about the postponement, our Director of Talent Relations started reaching out to all of the guests that we already had contracts for. Some of them have confirmed that they are available. Some of them will not know for another couple of months what their filming schedule looks like. And some of them do have conflicts and will be unable to make it. So we are working with all of the current guest lineup to figure out which ones are still available. We do have an additional list of people. Every year we have a list of probably 3 times the number of guests that we can actually bring. And that is because once we reach out, their schedules can change, things like that. So we always have additional ideas, more people that we can invite. Our intention at this point is to have the same size guest lineup that we had originally planned for May. Obviously, like you said, people's schedules will be changing, filming will resume. So there's a lot of that's going to be up in the air for a while. But as long as the guests are available, I don't anticipate any real change as far as what the show looks like. So far, we haven't had any agents say, no, we're uncomfortable completely because we postponed. I think at this point, it's sort of a wait and see. We need to give it another 60 days or so to see how people are feeling about it as we get into the summer months.
Very good. Michael, did you have a question?
Yeah, it kind of goes along the same lines from, because one of the big draws for me and my wife, but I think for folks as well, is like, the vendor area, the artist alley, special guests, those kind of folks. Do those schedules tend to fluctuate much, or are they pretty flexible when it comes to rescheduling? The artists that are in the artist alley and the vendors who are coming, are those a little bit easier to reschedule for when the show changes like this?
So, this situation is completely unprecedented. We've been doing this now for 19 years and have never rescheduled a show. So to answer your question as generally as possible, it depends. We have a lot of our artists and vendors who have already contacted us and said, yes, I'll be there. We have a handful who have said, I was already booked in another show that weekend. Most of those have already committed to coming back in May of 2021. So for the most part, there won't be a whole lot of change to the vendor hall, artist alley. We are actually finding that we have more opportunity in some areas. Memorial Day weekend and the weeks surrounding it are really big for author conventions. So we didn't have a lot of internationally based authors already booked because a lot of them were already booked in other places. But September happens to be a big touring time for authors. So they're already on book tours and will be in the area. And we're finding that we're getting more requests for some groups than we had for the May dates. So yes, there will be some changes. There will be a few vendors that you might be familiar with who will not be able to be there in September, but will be back in May. There will be some new vendors and new artists that maybe we haven't seen before. But by and large, the vendors and artists that we have been coming to our show for a long time. So a lot of them will have been making arrangements to come anyway.
Okay. And Justin, do you have something to add in right now?
Yeah, so even, I guess my one question would be, in your estimation, just your best guess, let's just assume like next year's Fan Fusion, would you anticipate there being significant changes to how the venue operates?
For the May convention?
Yes.
In 2021.
I'm not sure that I want to make sure I'm answering your actual question, Justin. The venue and the way that it operates is really under the hands of the City of Phoenix and the Convention Center. But as far as how we operate the show within the venue, the specific changes that we're making now are based on the CDC guidelines to have additional opportunities for sanitation, cleaning in between. The Convention Center has installed multiple new hand sanitizing stations, really just following more of that protocol. Whether that is still in place come May of 2021, we just don't know yet.
And Kristin, I had a couple of, it's kind of like a mixture of one that I had for myself and then one that somebody had asked on the one of the fan groups. And the question was, with the current situation as you know it, obviously by the time September rolls around, things could change. Have there been any discussions, and I know it's moved from a 4 days to 3 days, have there been any discussions about having to limit the number of people that are in an auditorium or the number of people that will be allowed to buy tickets to the events?
Not at this time. Really the answer to that question is it's way too early to speculate on that kind of thing. if the CDC guidelines change between now and September, certainly we would follow all of the safety precautions that are put in place. Whether that means having fewer people in each panel room, allowing fewer people into the vendor hall at a time. But at this time, there's just no indication of how long this will go on. Mm-hmm. And so it's difficult to make those kinds of decisions. The best we can do right now is to plan the show as it normally goes and make adaptations as we go along, as we get new information.
Makes sense. Michael, did you have something?
No, I don't think I have anything else right now.
So what I wanted to discuss, if you can, without tipping your hand too much, let's talk something more positive and about what are some of the things that people can look forward to, possibly new things added to the show, changes that were made based on feedback from last year, things like that that are, not related to quarantines and infectious disease, where people actually, would be looking forward to when things do resume.
A much more enjoyable topic.
Yes.
Yeah, so, prior to all of the stuff being postponed, we had been looking at some significant changes, some of which we now have to kind of reconfirm because of the date change. But we're looking at adding some new elements to our panels and programming, some things maybe you haven't seen before. What I think are kind of exciting, much more interactive types of shows, rather than panels themselves, and just kind of expanding our repertoire to include more things that people can just go and enjoy. And I think you'll see a lot of changes in the programming itself. Our programming team has just been working like crazy to bring in, some national acts and some really kind of amazing types of panels that are a little bit different than some of the things you've seen before.
And that's good because, that it's always good to have a familiarity to the show, but of course you have to grow every year because you don't want it to become stagnant and people to say, oh, that's exactly what I saw last year or the previous year before that, with just a few little wrinkles on top of that. And it has to be very frustrating for you in terms of having to adapt things down to 3 days versus 4 days. So could you tell us at this point, obviously things are in change, are you expecting to lose things, or is it going to be a simple fact that you have to condense and maybe something that was in a larger room is now split so 2 things can take up that ad space? Or how do you think that's going to work out?
Yeah, so there are a few things that we're doing to sort of adapt to this 3-day schedule that we have. One is there were a number of panels that were sort of ideas, sort of half developed kind of things that we were thinking about doing. And we've just said, okay, let's just stop those, because we will have a little bit less availability to put on those panels than we have. The other thing that we're looking at is just rearranging the schedule a little bit. We've had some gaps in the schedule where there were hours at a time where different rooms were not being used, or they were used for prep and setup. And so we're moving the prep and setup to rooms outside of the panel rooms, so that we can get as much of that paneling in as possible, without having to lose anything. Certainly there will be some changes. Obviously we won't have a Thursday. We won't have, so there will be fewer panels. There's only so many we can get into 3 days instead of 4. But right now we're just looking at rearranging, like you said, making some of the panel rooms maybe slightly smaller to accommodate 2 panels at a time instead of 1. But really looking at those panels that have the smaller audiences anyway, the really niche ones, that can move into smaller rooms and still accommodate all the people who want to see them. So we don't anticipate a whole lot of loss. Some of the ones that are the fan favorites that come back every year, we're still planning on those. And there were other things like, in the past few years, we've done a series of panels where we roast different characters.
Mhm.
So the roast of Darth Vader, the roast of Captain Kirk, the roast, and things like that, where we had planned this year on expanding them and maybe doing 4 or 5 of those instead of 2 or 3. We're just going to go back to doing the 2 or 3. So from an audience perspective, I don't know that they'll see a whole lot of change as far as, losing out on panels that they really want, because we are focusing on obviously bringing in the fan favorites, those new exciting ones that we've got in the works, and really making sure that we've got a well-rounded balance of panels across every genre. So I think there's still plenty to do. Obviously there's some challenges with losing a day, but I think that we've adapted to it pretty well. And the paneling is going to be pretty impressive this year.
Okay, so the final question I have is the, for lack of a better phrase, I always refer to it as the street fair between the buildings, where you have the live acts, they have the vehicle displays, some of the pop-ups, vendors and stuff like that. Is that going to remain the same? And do you anticipate any changes to entry? Because I know, for example, in the past couple of years, there was the increased security and stuff like that. Someone just posted up and said, can you ask him if they anticipate any differences to the, the queue policy, the entry, the badge pickup, or anything like that?
So a couple of the changes that you'll see are ones that we had already put in place before the date change. Most notably that we have gone away from the wristbands that we've used the last couple of years and brought back the very popular badges with lanyards. We actually had started a month or so ago a badge design contest, and we were a day or so away from opening public voting on the badge designs when the postponement was announced. So we've put that on hold, but there are some really amazing badge designs. The other change that we announced when we announced the postponement is that all full event badge holders are going to receive a free collectible lanyard and pin. We have in the past sold those in our merchandise booths, and we're going to give those away to all full event badge holders. There still probably will be some available for the single day badge holders. But because we've gone back to badges, we've also stopped the shipping, which was something that we did with the wristbands, but never did with the badges. So that first change that you'll see is that everyone who purchases a badge will have to go into the redemption room to pick up their badge. We've redesigned that room and expanded the number of people and the number of stations that we have working to keep the wait time to pick up badges as.
And we've lost audio, so hopefully we will get her back in 1 second. As I said, folks, the joy of live recording. So, yeah, I actually had one other question I was going to ask. Oh, you're back. Sorry, you faded out there for a second. There we go.
Oh, no problem. The security changes we will have more information once we meet with the convention center. We don't know at this point what, if any, changes would be put in place because of the change.
Okay. And I actually, if you have time, could you indulge us for one more question that popped up?
Of course.
Okay. So what people had a question asked, how did, obviously availability of the convention center was one thing. How did the date for September arise, and were there people looking at pushing possibly back October, November, December, or what was it about September? It just made everything seem perfect.
Really, Gareth, you answered your own question. It was solely dependent on the availability of the convention center. Every meeting, convention, and event that has been scheduled at the convention center in March, April, May, possibly into June, runs the risk of being postponed. There are multiple events trying to reschedule at the convention center at this time. And really it came down to being able to utilize the most space at the best time of year. There were a couple of other dates floated around, but ones that were in direct conflict conflict with other community events, or that didn't give us the space. For example, there was one date, I believe it was in July, that was offered to us where we would have only the lower level exhibit hall and about 6 panel rooms. Mm. And when you look at the show that we put on, that's just not feasible.
No.
So even if the dates were better or the timing was better, it really came down to all of those pieces coming together at the same time. The amount of space, the number of days, the panel rooms we can use, all of those things had to align. And this was the only date that the convention center had available that offered us that opportunity. So it really wasn't a matter of us saying, here's what we want. It was the convention center saying, here's what we have.
And, you know, in many ways, it actually worked out well, because some of the other national shows that have said, you know, this is what we're looking at, they're all cramming around August. And so, you know, there was one scenario I saw where there could be potentially 3 large conventions in 2.5 weeks. And, you know, you also run into the risk of, there's only so much travel people can do. There's only so much hotels can do. I know this show draws very well from the local area, but I mean, you obviously are going to have people coming in from out of state. And it certainly helps, I think, to be able to say, look, this is our date. Look at the schedule right now. If you notice there's not as many conflicts as other dates would be, book it. So I do think
Sure.
you definitely did well with this date, because as you said, July could have been an absolutely chaotic mess. And plus
Well,
it gives,
you know,
go ahead.
when you're in Phoenix, you also have to look at weather.
Yes.
You know, do we want to host the convention in the middle of July when it's bound to be 120 degrees outside?
My wife actually brought that up. She said it will be very interesting to see the cosplay this year, because people have always gone above and beyond with the cosplay at the show. But she said, I'm curious, since we're not in May, if the weather is a little better, are we going to see more and more people getting involved with it? Are we going to see maybe some costumes that people would say, otherwise, no, too hot to do in the summer, I'm going to do this one instead? And I think it's really going to spawn people's creativity, because they have time right now, especially.
I got to tell you, the thing that I love about this community so much, I mean, obviously it's a disappointment to have to postpone our show. Mm-hmm. It's disappointing to us. I know it's disappointing to the fans. It's something that everybody looks forward to every year, and having to tell people you have to wait 4 more months. It could have been viewed very negatively, but the thing that I love about this Phoenix community and the fans that we have is how many people chose to look at this in the positive light. The weather will be better. I have 4 more months to make sure my cosplay is on point. I have extra time to plan. I have extra time to save so that I can support the vendors and artists that are local to our community that need that help. And now I'm committed to doing that. And the way this community has just banded together, we actually have on our website now a page for all of our local artists and vendors, and the overwhelmingly positive response of people trying to support that community of creators is just fantastic. And you know, you look at this group of people, this group of 65,000 people who come to the show every year, and how supportive and positive they have been. It's just amazing. And I think you're right. We've selected great dates. I think it's going to be a great show. But without that support from the folks who come every year, we couldn't do it. You know, we could not move forward with these new dates with any kind of positive feeling about how that was going to work out if it weren't for the response that we got from our fans. And you know, when things like this happen and they band together and come together as a community, it's just amazing, you know. And I think it doesn't matter the dates, they're going to make it a great show. They're going to come in their cosplay, and it's going to be amazing cosplay. And they're going to come and support these local artists and vendors that are struggling right now. And, you know, regardless of any of the changes and inconveniences we'll have because of the postponement, this community is going to make it a fantastic show.
Absolutely.
There's a way around that, because it's just great
people are really excited and they're ready to go. I mean, on a personal note, I always sit there and say, this show kicks off our summer convention. I go, from you to one of the video game cons to the other ones. And with the panel we've done on video games, it's always been a little fun because we're a week or two away from the giant reveals that are coming at the convention to come. And that's part of the fun, is the speculation and all that. But I was joking with someone. I said, well, here's the beauty of it now. Most of the reveals are going to be already done. So I'm not going to have the struggle with people saying, no comment, or I'm going to give you this, but you can't let anyone film it or anything like that, or you can't let anyone see it. I think it'll allow a much greater range of creativity, because you're going to have people saying, thank goodness we have a forum now, when so many of these forums have been denied to us this year. And I think it's just we're going to see
a lot of stuff happening in that.
Yeah, we're going to just see so much creativity.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening in the July, August, September timeframe. There's going to be so much activity going on, especially because everyone's just going to be happy to be out of their houses. That I think it's going to be this sort of frenzy of activity, and people are going to be excited about it. People are going to be excited to see the new reveals. People are going to be excited for the new sort of season. And yeah, we've always sort of been the kickoff the summer kind of show, having been sort of that end of May, first week of June timeframe for the last 10 years. So it'll be interesting to be the close of summer show this year, we'll bookend it, and then of course we'll move directly into planning our show for May of 2021. So it's going to be a whirlwind of activity on our end as well, seeing what's coming up in the industry, what's going to continue filming after all of this ends, and and what we'll be able to do having these back-to-back shows that are 6 months apart.
Crazy. Yeah, that's kind of scary when you think about it like that, isn't it? 6 months. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it really takes us about a year to plan, and we had already started sort of the preliminary planning for 2021. So, this is going to run us right up to the end of September, and then boom, turn around and get May off the ground. And it'll be interesting to see how much activity and how much of that frenzy we can keep going. Obviously our hope is that we have a great show in September and everybody comes back for 2021, and we can close out summer of 2020 and then kick off summer of 2021 again with our 20th anniversary show.
Oh, wow. That's true. 20 anniversary, 20 years. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
it's
big
milestone, and we're looking forward to it, and we hope everybody will join us.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Kristin. We really appreciate it, and thank you for answering some of the difficult questions and our general questions. And thank you for, going ahead and giving people something to look forward to. I know there's a lot of people who, as you said, were very disappointed when it was canceled, but they postponed, but they understood the reason behind it. And I know there's a lot of people that are just looking at September and saying, I hope we can do the show, because I certainly need to have this thing to look forward to. And definitely
I think
a wonderful
it's great
thing
for everyone. And, we so appreciate the fans and everybody looking forward to the show. I appreciate you having me on. And when we have more information and get a little closer, I'd love to come back and tell you about some more of the changes and some of the things that we can actually talk about once we have that information.
Oh, absolutely. We will definitely have you back. Thank you again so much for being here today.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen. So, very busy show today. We had our two guests on today, and want to thank them again for coming on. Got a lot of really good information. And then, of course, a little more traditional show next week. We're going to talk about the Kanto U speakers that just arrived. They were debuted at the Consumer Electronics Show. And it's kind of sad to think about, but that's been my only convention of 2020 this year. We had staff covering things like PAX East and so on. We have a few other products to talk about. We talked last week about the new Dungeons & Dragons book and the new dice set, but we're also going to be looking at some of the other things that are coming down the pipe. I've got some video up of some new VR games for the PlayStation VR, and one of them is rather humorous. They're both very funny, but one of them is called Good Goliath, and essentially you play this giant, and you use your hands to grab pitchforks and barrels and explosives, and you throw them back at the tiny community members who are attacking you, and you try to blow them up, take their town down, that sort of thing. And the other one is called Final Assault, and it's basically like playing your army men. You have to sit there and pick your units, put them around, and try to defend your base and storm the battle. So a lot of stuff. And of course, check us out at sknr.net. Remember to check out our magazine. We have the new one available with Dying Light 2 as the cover story. You can get it at Barnes & Noble and wherever magazines are sold, digital formats ideally. Catch me each week, BJ Shea's Geek Nation on KSW-FM radio. We put the simulcast up on our page. And of course, PenalCentral.com for our network of newspapers. Justin, do you have anything you wanted to conclude with?
No, I think that covers just about everything.
Perfect. And Michael, anything for you?
Nope, nothing for me.
All right, folks. Well, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the guest, and we'll be back next week. Until then, take care, and we look forward to talking to you very, very soon. Bye-bye now.